Hello and welcome back. sleepywhatsit here with a new miniatures video for you. In today's video, we are going to be talking about how to mount older Warhammer Fantasy battle figures onto round bases for Age of Sigmar. An alternative title for this video would have been something like how to attach a square peg to a round base. Specifically, what we're going to be looking at is how to mount older figures like this Tomb Banshee that come with an integrated base onto a round base in an aesthetically pleasing manner. If you play one of the Age of Sigmar factions that has a direct ancestor in fantasy battles like Seraphon, Cities of Sigmar, Skaven, Daughters of Cain, Orc War Clans, Maw Tribes, Fire Slayers, or Legions of Nagash, and so on, there may be a number of units in your army that use older models that came from fantasy battles and thus originally were meant to be put on square bases. For legacy units like this that are more battle line, like Dread Spears or Black Ark Corsairs, that tend to be taken in blocks of 5, 10, or more, often the bases were not integrated since they have to be able to rank up easily and the over-textured bases tend to cause problems with that. Thus, converting them to rounds is relatively easy, since all you have to do is glue them onto a round base of the appropriate size instead of a square base. If you need to know the exact size, GW does provide a list of all of the official sizes for bases for all the legal units, which I'll put a link down below. The more interesting units, which we'll be spending most of this video on, tend to be single model units. That's because these often would have a sculpted integrated base, so just gluing them onto a round instead, it loses some of the aesthetics, and for some of them can kind of compromise them structurally. Some examples of this type of model are Tomb Banshee, the Cairn Wraith, Dark Elf Sorceress, Black Ark Fleet Master, the Skink Star Priest, the Chaos Sorcerer Lord, and many others that I'm probably forgetting. Interestingly enough, the Greyseer model, which is an older model, doesn't have an integrated square base in spite of the fact it's effectively a command unit. Instead, it was sculpted with the rocks that it's standing on attached to the feet, so it's actually really easy to mount onto a round base since there's no other base that you have to contend with. I'm going to pop out our Tomb Banshee out of her little plastic prison here and partially assemble her so that we can see more clearly what we're working with and what I'm talking about. Now that we have her assembled, I can temporarily attach her to the included square base using a bit of sticky tack so we can observe her in all of her classic glory. If you're just playing casually and don't really care about having the exact right size of base, it's totally fine to build your model like this. Though if you're planning on playing more competitively, especially like in organized tournaments and things like that, there's often a requirement for using the correctly sized bases for Age of Sigmar, so you will have to convert to rounds. The simplest and possibly least aesthetically pleasing way to do this is just to build her as a traditional fantasy battles model with the square base and just stick her onto the round one. This will give the model some extra height and give it a bit of a step pyramid type vibe, which for a Star Priest might actually be what you're looking for, but in general is going to look a little bit wonky and kind of amateurish. You could also do some cover-up with green stuff and other basing materials to conceal that you have a base on top of a base. I've seen some somewhat awesome builds that do this effectively using the verticality to make it more of a scenic base, but I've also seen a lot of builds that this just kind of looks weird and out of proportion because they're now too tall, and it's like, oh, that's just a base on top of a base. Another option would be to build her using the square base and then have an adapter that converts that base from a square to the appropriate sized round. This solution was more popular when Age of Sigmar came out, since people had large armies based on classic square bases that they wanted to use. This can work and look aesthetically pleasing, but I would probably only really consider it if you were looking at models that you had already built or bought, and you didn't really want to go through the whole hassle of sawing off and rebasing them. Though in theory with an adapter, if it is magnetized, you can use a single model for multiple systems by being able to switch them around, though that seems like a little bit of excess work at times. For me personally, at least, I have more plastic than I have time for playing games, so it's simpler to just play different factions for different systems and thus have separate models, and instead of trying to do a double, triple, or even more duty with a single army. Also, I enjoy the process of painting and building more than playing for many games, but if you're all about playing a single faction regardless of the game, basing your models on the small spaces that all of the systems use, the lowest common denominator, and converting them up may be a reasonable way to go. The method that I like to use with these types of integrated base is to carve them off the sides of the base so that you're left with a top plate that can be glued onto the appropriate sized base. This is definitely a work-intensive solution, but I like that it kind of maintains the original sculptor intent and vision for the model. The quickest way to do this is if you have a rotary tool like a Dremel and something like a sanding bit or an engraving bit, then you can just grind away carefully to get all the sides off and just glue it on. So that's the simplest, fastest way to get things done. If you do not have these tools available to you, you can still remove them, the sides of the base and do everything, and that's what I'm going to be showing here. You're going to need some plastic nippers, a hobby knife, and some sort of abrasive like a file or sanding block or a stick, something like that. To begin with, you're going to want to cut in using the nippers along the corners so that the sides are now 4 flanges along the sides of the base. Once you have this done, you're going to want to nip away each flange using your clippers or nippers, following just under where the side meets the top. This first pass is a bulk removal process, so don't expect to be perfectly smooth along there. Just focus on removing as much of the material as possible, but without cutting into the topper elements that you want to preserve. Now that we have the top removed from the sides, we can start cleaning up our cuts a bit so that so it's even and flat. So we're first going to use our hobby knife to remove any large knobs of material. If you're particularly patient and skilled with your hobby knife, you may be able to just clean up enough using your hobby knife and not have to use a file afterwards. If instead you're like me and somewhat lacking in the knife skills, it's probably easier just to do be a bit more conservative with your knife to avoid damaging anything and leave the file clean up to using a file just to grind all of that off. Now that we have our topper removed and cleaned up, we can attach it to our round. This is most easily done using plastic cement since it will fuse the topper to the base, but CA glue thinly applied can also be used. Now that the topper is adhered, we now just need to conceal the edge where it meets the base. Options for this include using putty like green stuff, adding some texture paste, or using basing elements like grass, rocks, grit, or something like that, just to conceal where this seam is. So this is how my base looks with some basic concealing done using texture paste. And now the edge will be ready to be primed and painted. With the basing done this way, we've preserved the original aesthetic of the design, but it works with Age of Sigmar rules, and the model's height/scale is still appropriate. I hope you found this video informative. If you did enjoy it, please give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. If there are things that you'd like for me to cover on the channel, please reach out to me in the comments down below or on Twitter. If you want to keep up with what projects I'm currently working on, please follow me on Instagram or check out my painting streams that I do on the weekends over on Twitch. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.